Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a truly mind-bending question. We spend so much time obsessing over who we are as individuals, right? Our personalities, our quirks, our goals. But what if the very concept of you, the fundamental way you define your own existence, was actually hardwired by the cultural environment you grew up in? Today we're exploring the profound differences between Western and Indian perspectives on the self, drawing directly from some incredibly insightful psychological research on personality. Take a second to personally reflect on this. Where do you end and the world begins? Where do you actually draw the line between your own distinct identity and your surrounding community, your family, or even nature itself? Like, if someone insults your family, do you feel it as a personal attack on you, or is it something entirely separate? It sounds like a philosophical riddle, I know, but psychologists have found that how you answer this depends heavily on where in the world you were raised. Your culture provides the literal lens through which you view your existence.
Okay, let's dive into this by first grounding ourselves in what psychologists actually mean when they use the word self. It's the totality of an individual's conscious experiences, ideas, thoughts, and feelings with regard to herself or himself. Think of it like a giant, invisible backpack you carry around, filled with the complete package of how you mentally represent yourself as a person. But, as we're about to see, the very structure of this totality changes dramatically depending on your culture. And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference we're talking about. Just look at the contrast here. Representing the Western perspective on the left, you see two rigid, solid triangles. One is the individual, one is the group. Now compare that to the Indian perspective on the right. There are no sharp edges, just circles with dotted, permeable lines nested within each other. This isn't just a fun design choice. It represents a fundamental psychological difference in how human beings experience reality, and how the boundary is drawn between the self and the other.
So let's break down that Western view first. In the Western perspective, the boundary drawn between the self and the other is relatively fixed. Think of it like a personal fortress. The self is contained, solid, and clearly demarcated from everything that is not the self. You are inside your walls, and the rest of the world is on the outside. This fixed boundary is a hallmark of Western cultural conditioning. Because of those fortress walls, the Western view neatly categorizes the world into opposing pairs, or clear dichotomies. There is the self versus the other. There is man versus nature, where nature is seen as something entirely outside of us, and there is the subjective internal world versus the objective external reality. To understand the world through a Western cultural lens, everything has its separate box, and the lines are drawn in permanent marker. Within this fixed framework, look at how the individual interacts with society. In Western culture, the self and the group exist as two completely different entities with clearly defined boundaries. In fact, they often remain at a distance from one another. Why? Because to be yourself in a Western context usually means proving how you stand apart from the crowd. Maintaining that gap allows individual members of the group to preserve their distinct individuality. But now let's flip the script and look at the Indian cultural context. The Indian view of the self simply does not make those clear dichotomies. Instead of a brick wall, the boundary between the self and the other isn't fixed at all. It's characterized by its shifting nature. It's fluid, dynamic, and constantly adapting. It's that dotted, permeable circle we saw earlier, allowing for a totally different way of moving through life. Now, what's really fascinating about this is the sheer flexibility of it. In the Indian view, yourself can, at one moment of time, expand to literally fuse with the entire cosmos, or stretch out to fully include others. You and the universe are one. Yet, in the very next moment, it can seem to completely withdraw, pulling tightly inward to focus fully on your individual self, like your personal needs or specific daily goals. It's a breathing, moving concept of identity. This fluidity naturally leads to a beautifully different relationship with society. In Indian culture, the self is generally not separated from one's own group. Because the boundaries are shifting, the self isn't fighting to separate from the collective. Rather, both remain in a state of harmonious coexistence. The self is entirely comfortable being intertwined with the group, without that pressing need to maintain a strict distance just to protect one's individuality. So the crucial point is how these internal boundaries shape massive global cultural trends. Those fixed boundaries and the distance maintained between the self and the group, that is exactly why many Western cultures are characterized as individualistic. The focus is always on the distinct, autonomous self. On the flip side, those shifting boundaries, the lack of rigid dichotomies, and that harmonious coexistence are why many Asian cultures, including Indian culture, are characterized as collectivistic. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought for this explainer. Consider this. Does your culture define you, or do you define your culture? We've just seen that the very architecture of our minds, whether we see ourselves as a rigid fortress or a fluid, breathing circle, is heavily influenced by the cultural air we breathe. It's a powerful reminder that our deepest sense of self is a shared creation. The next time you define who you are, ask yourself who handed you the pen. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive, and keep questioning those boundaries.